And welcome to the third edition of the Make the Adjustment podcast. I am extremely excited to bring you today's guest, Traci Fiatte Thomas. For those who don't know, Traci Fiatte Thomas is the CEO of SI Systems. She's also the founder of TFT Advisory. But more interestingly than that, she was one of my first bosses over 20 years ago when we worked together at a company called Sapphire Technologies. You also know Traci's name if you read our book, Make the Adjustment, because in chapter 10, I highlighted her quite a bit. We talked about her level of courageousness as a leader in the workplace. And also something that she talks about is having an abundance mindset, which we'll talk a lot about today. So Traci, I know you're coming to Chicago today. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's an honor to see you on the podcast. And how's things going for you at SI Systems thus far?
Things are so fun and dynamic. Things are going great. We're really, really excited to be we're in transformation mode for sure. A little bit about SI Systems. We're roughly a $500 million company that does the majority of the business in Canada. And our ambition is to grow that and double it. So be $1 billion company inside of 3 to 5 years, both by remaining the largest IT staffing supplier in Canada, but also going south of the border and getting ourselves more abundant in the U.S.
That's amazing. That's so great. I mean, to think about $500,000 growing to $1 billion. I mean, it's something you've done before. I mean, you were previously the CEO of Randstad. So we talk about working together at Sapphire Technologies. We were acquired by Randstad back in 2008. We branded to Randstad Technologies, and you went on to become the CEO of Randstad North America, which is incredible. I remember back in the day, and we were working in a sales team, a national accounts division. You were like our national accounts director, growing all these big accounts, and you got promoted into our parent company, and you were looking to backfill your seat, and that's how we started talking back in 2005 or so. And it was great. I mean, you were my boss there for a few years, and I mean, I look back on that time, Traci. I think about so many competencies you have, but strategic thinking. I just remember you would challenge me around the number of accounts, why the accounts, how we're approaching the accounts, and just your level of acumen with those big client relationships. I think your big one back in the day was, God, this is IBM. I'm really dating ourselves, right? That was one of your big ones. You had a bunch of big ones. What were some of the other big ones you had in that portfolio back in the day? This is 20 years ago, but I got to ask.
The biggest ones were Bank of America, IBM, EDS, American Express. Those were some of the big guys. If I really wanted to date myself, I will say Bell Atlantic, which today is Verizon, of course.
Wow.
But yeah,
that's wild. Yeah, that's great. Good stuff. Well, listen, as an executive coach, I do leadership training, sales training. Everybody that comes on the podcast, I always ask them this question first, and I'm sure you're going to have an amazing answer. But I deeply value personal and professional development. I know you feel the same way. So I'm curious, with that in mind, share the most significant advice that you've ever gotten from a current or former boss, leader, manager, someone you admire, and just how it impacted you in your leadership style.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to answer your question directly, Chris. I might sound like a politician that's answering my own question, but when I really think about that question, it's hard for me to say I have one singular piece of advice that I could share. What I would say, though, is that through my career, I've had leaders who have taught me things along the way that I would summarize this way. So first and foremost, some of the most formative leadership development that I had came from being told what I wasn't good at. There was a lot of times, like you said, I loved what I still love what I do. I've always loved what I've done. But I would say success was a little easy for me out of the gate. I liked what I did. I was good at what I did. And I was kind of a kid that just felt invincible. So that first eye opener of being told you could do way better at first didn't feel great. But what I realized was that the intention of that feedback was to push me to be even better. And that, to me, is the best leadership. It wasn't advice. It was actually leadership, I guess, demonstration that really has taught me as a leader myself. It's like, you're an athlete. To me, it's being a coach. It's pushing someone further than they think they can go, even when they're the star athlete and they're convinced they're the star athlete. Being able to pinpoint where you can push them, when you can push them, and how to make them even better. That is probably the best leadership demonstration that I've had in my career.
That's so fascinating because there's so many things I can go with that. I mean, number one, you talk about being a coach. Harvard Business Review wrote an article about different leadership styles, and coaching is a style. And coaching is just asking questions, just asking really good questions and getting the most out of your quote unquote players. But it's fascinating to think, like, I had similar advice many years ago. I think, one of the previous colleagues we work with, Bob, and he would push me as well. His famous tagline, my famous tagline is make the adjustment. His was good job doing your job. And, if I ever had a really good week at work and I'd be peacocking around the bullpen, all proud of myself, be like, hey, Chris, good job doing your job. That's why you pay your salary, right? And to your point, I think at first it felt like a little bit of a jab, but to your point, the intention of it was to get the most he could out of me. And I think that's the intent of what you're saying. That advice is incredible, or I guess that I should say more, that observation is incredible. So talk to me about that, because pushing people, right? It's our job to get 100% out of people, not 101%, not 99%. Getting the most out of each one of your people, whether it's a vice president, individual contributor, anybody on your team. Talk to me about your approach with that, because you and I talked before the interview today about emotional intelligence, the importance of that. But just talk to me about your approach with how you get the best out of your people.
Well, one of the cliches that I have said for years and continue to say either out loud or even to myself is that I genuinely believe that a good captain walks the deck. And I very much like to be with people, whether it is front office, back office. I don't believe that I have advice to give if I don't know what that person is actually dealing with and working with and seeing. So I spend a tremendous amount of time. You mentioned I'm in Chicago. I've always spent my time either in Chicago and New York. When I worked for Randstad, that was headquartered in Atlanta. When it was Sapphire, it was Boston. So I've always said I've had the luxury of not being in the corporate office. I have always sat in the branches and in the field. Now I'll go to the offices. And even now with SI Systems, we're based in Calgary. We have huge operations in Toronto. I go there frequently, but I don't sit there. And I love that. I actually think that that is one way to be able to do that. So I believe in that mantra, good captain walks the deck. And when you can sit with someone, you can ask the right questions. You can start to see where the right places to push are and where the wrong places to push are. And to me, that's the name of the game.
Yeah. And let's talk about the Canadian marketplace, because 20 years ago as well, I had an opportunity back in the day when we were at Sapphire Randstad, where we had acquisition of, I think it was CNC Global at the time it was called, before we rebranded. And they were based in Toronto. So I also did a bunch of business in Toronto. I was in Montreal, Halifax, et cetera. Talk to our listeners, the majority of our listeners in the United States. Talk to me about, what it's like to do business in Canada, and talk to me about the things that they do up there that we're like, man, we're probably missing out. We could probably take a different approach down here in the States and do some of the things differently. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that, because you've been in SI Systems for about a year, a little bit over a year now.
Correct. It's interesting. The way I would answer that is the same way as if a European asked me what it's like to do business in the United States, right? Doing business in the US is different if you're in New York versus Texas versus San Francisco.
Very true.
It is just as diverse in
Yeah.
Canada. So Toronto is their equivalent of a New York. So it's a big city. It's got more of a big city vibe and a directness versus, Calgary, which is Houston for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Big energy sector,
Oil, gas. Yeah, right.
oil and gas. It's as, I would say, conservative as you're going to get in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So it really does vary place to place. What I will say is that while it's stereotypical that everyone is nice, everyone is really nice and polite. So they're much more, I would say, a lot more relationship driven, which I really like.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and so let's definitely dig into that. We talk about relationships, but give me some sort of, like, if you go back in time, right? I want to talk about advice when you maybe were at a vulnerable time of your life. Like, you opened up talking about how getting critical feedback is important, but like, go back in time to your younger self. Like, let's go back 15, 20, 25 plus years. What's the advice that you'd give Traci back in, 2000, 2005? Things now that maybe you didn't know then and wish you knew then.
Again, I go back and part of me says, I don't know that I would want advice, because falling off that bike and having to get back on it it shows, it forces you to really learn the lesson. So I don't know that I would want a ton of advice. I think if there was one, I would have loved someone to teach me that silence is the strongest form of communication, and that I don't always have to be speaking, and I don't always have to have the last answer, and that if someone says something, you can just be quiet. I think that might be the advice I would have liked to have.
Well, that's great stuff, and that's a good segue to the question I'm going to ask you, because you were kind enough to give me your time, not only today, but when I interviewed you for my book a few years ago. And when I reached out to you, I said, "Hey, Traci, I really admired your courage, your strategic thinking, your skill for communication, being courageous, like all these things. And where did this come from?" And I'll let you answer that in a second. But I will say this as your employee. I mean, I work for you directly. The importance of psychological safety. As an executive coach and as a leadership coach, I can't oversell how important emotional intelligence is, how important psychological safety is in the workplace, because I know that we had it back in the day with the team that we had, including, you and I working together. But how do you ensure that? How do you continue that in the workplace today? Whether it was at Randstad, whether it's SI Systems, making sure that it's like baked into your culture, because you and I both know how important that is, because when you have it, the team wins, and you're going to attain these goals of growing from, $500 million to $1 billion. But just what are the things you do to make sure it's really baked into your culture?
So it's a good question, and I don't want to sound self-serving, but I will say, Chris, it starts at the top. And for me personally, it is genuinely critical to the success, in my opinion. So I love teams. I love everything about a team. I like to lead teams for sure, but I like to be on a team. And I want the whole team to win. I'm not interested in winning by myself. I don't believe that I can win by myself. I genuinely want to have the team with me. And if there's one thing that a team has to do, is you have to have their back.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have your teammates back. And so anyone who works for me, I will have your back. Now, that doesn't mean that we might not have a conversation that isn't rosy, right? We're going to have those direct feedbacks. We're going to have those one-on-one. They're going to be non-personal, right? They're going to be about your professional situation. But I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, I was in a board meeting where private equity held. We had a board meeting last week. I brought some of my colleagues with me to participate in the board meeting. And one of my colleagues said something in the board meeting that I didn't 100% agree with. I would never say anything in that room.
Right.
Because at that board meeting, we were on the same side of the desk. We're the team. And so I mean, of course, I said nothing. But after the fact,
Yeah, you
I
coach
did,
later.
right? I did talk to the person, and it wasn't even about coaching. It was just saying, "Hey, I noticed you said something that I'm not 100% aligned with. Let's get aligned."
That's great.
Right? But I think that shows you, in my opinion, that you can say that it's a safe place, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to demonstrate that it's a safe place. And I'll just use that as just one example where I would hope that that person recognized now and forever that I will have their back,
Yeah.
whether they're in the room or not in the room.
Yeah, I mean, you're exuding so many things about being a great teammate, emotional intelligence, self-control. Like when you mentioned this earlier, like when not to speak. That was a perfect example of when not to speak as a leader. Because if you continued that thought, or you started to create conflict in that board meeting, what a wrong place for that conflict would be, right? So you handle it privately, which is spot on. I love that. Well, I want to talk about the book and some of the contributions you'd had in the book, because I'm a huge fan of Kaizen. We also worked with a gentleman a long time ago, Steve McMahon, used to talk to me about Kaizen all the time, which is Japanese for continuous improvement. And so one of the things we had talked about when I interviewed you in the book was just like this, I call it a growth mindset. You've called it abundance mindset. Talk to me about that. Like when you are coaching leaders, individual contributors, salespeople, it doesn't even matter, right? You and I both know that we can't control the external factors around us. We can only control how we respond to those things, right? So how do people how do you try to help people get to that growth mindset, especially the ones that don't have it, maybe, or maybe resist change? I'd be curious to see your thoughts on that, because you've had to lead some massive organizational change through the years in the companies you've worked at.
I think that, whether we call it a growth mindset, abundance mindset, there's, again, I come back to cliches. So I think that as someone, if ever going to do a roast of me, they'd probably come up with a bunch of cliches. But the phrase, name your limitation and they're yours. And that's absolutely true. And so, I'll rather than answer the question, Chris, I'm going to give you an example. I'll give you more examples. About 3 weeks ago, I was with a colleague out in one of our field offices, and we were driving from one to the other. And this person is in a management position. I will say more of like I'll call it a middle management position. And we were talking about growing in an economy. Certainly, the Canadian economy is riddled with uncertainty, as is much of the world. And I would say the market for at least IT staffing is pretty flat. But the SOW or solutions business is certainly growing. It's a mirror image of the U.S., just a little bit behind, and probably a little bit less, right? So that's the way I look at it. So I was asking this person, how do they foresee being able to grow? And they were telling me how in this market, we happen to have really nice market share, that it's very difficult to grow accounts, and that the accounts we have, they see us as a staffing company, not a solutions company. So it's really hard to do that.
Not the first time you've heard that, I bet.
Not the first time I've heard it. And so what I did was I asked questions, right? So in my head, what I thought to myself, you just told yourself you can't do it, right? That's what I heard this person. They named their limitation. Oh, our brand is already known as a staffing company. And so I just started asking questions, and they found the answer to their own question. So I just find that you have to listen to people. You have to remind them how much is available instead of how much isn't available. You have to remind them things that they can do versus all the things that they can't do.
Right, right.
And I do find they have to reach it on their own. You have to lead them there, because just telling them, it won't stick.
No, you again, this is why we worked so well together. I admired you working with you. I've said many times, if you tell people what to do, you get short-term compliance. But if you change the way they think, you'll get long-term change. And I think for me as an executive coach and leader, I mean, I was an operator inside of companies for 27 years. And I started, a coaching practice 3 years ago. You've been operating companies now for, 30 years, and you've had an advisory firm. That's one of the biggest things I find to be the biggest challenge for leaders, is like leading change, like really leading organizational change, when employees might think, well, this is what we do. We can't do that. People don't know us for that. And we can use all the examples and cliches about Blockbuster or Netflix. Netflix used to send DVDs out. Right now, look what they do today. So you can't just sit here and say, well, Netflix is a DVD company, right? So SI Systems is not just a straight IT staff log company. They can, you guys can do other things, and you evolve as a company like we all do, right? So that's really fascinating, because leading change, I think, is just one of the biggest challenges. I mean, you stepped into the seat a year ago. Talk to me about that. Like, they talk about the importance of the first 90 days. You've made it now 365 plus days, which I'm not surprised. But, first 90 days, what was on your mind? What was your, you're talking to staffing leaders out there, whether they go acquire a company, they step into a big seat. Like, what's your approach? Like, how do you approach those first 90 days? I'm curious.
Well, the reason that I was hired as an American domiciled CEO for a Canadian company certainly was, our ambition is to be a North American company versus just a Canadian company. I don't say just as, but versus a Canadian
Understood.
company.
Yeah.
What was interesting, however, is that when I came in, we started to see the impact of, I would say, a stagnant and declining marketplace in, I would say, a greater spotlight than what anyone thought. So I was not brought in to transform the company. That is not why I was hired. I was hired to really go south of the Canadian border and flourish in the United States. That's still on the docket. but it has been pushed because what we realized was that the fundamental bones of the Canadian operation also needed some change. That wasn't originally why I was hired. So you want to talk about change management. I had to get my head around my own change management because that wasn't what I thought I was coming in to do.
Right.
And so the first 90 days, what I did was I listened. I went to every single office. I met with every single employee of the company. I am a very big believer. So, one of the reasons that I took the role is because I wasn't looking for a distressed company, right? I wasn't looking to go in and turn something around. That wasn't my ambition. Um, but so instead, what I was looking to do is just scale and grow. But we needed to pivot. And so I went and I listened. And I think it's really important when you're new to any, whether it's a department, right? If you're someone who's going to take over a new department, is you really need to honor the history that has made that department or that company successful. SI Systems is a leader in the space. There's a 30-year history where they have been the dominant player. Far be it from me in the first 30 days to come in and think that my ideas are the
Right.
best ones.
Right.
Right? So I didn't come in, even if I knew I was coming in to transform the company, which I did not. But
Right.
even if I did, I never ever would go in and just disrespect the
Yeah.
people who have worked so hard to
Yeah.
make the company great.
Yeah.
And so to me, that I think is really important, whether it's on a micro scale or a macro scale.
Again, you're kind enough to join the podcast, and I want to pump your tires a little bit because I think about the best leaders I've worked with, and you and I have worked with a lot of great ones, and you and I can reference some names from Randstad like Dan Foley and Greg Netlin and these people and Mark Eldridge, and you carry this with you. It's this insane amount of drive, determination, strategic thinking, execution, all those things. But the other half of it is how you treat people. It really is. And I think the best leaders, guys, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a leader out there, check in your ego. Like, you have to be confident. You have to carry a certain level of confidence and cachet, but you just check your ego, right? And listen and respect your colleagues and ask good questions, be a good teammate. I mean, everything you're saying, it sounds so simple, but it's so hard when you, Traci, are the CEO, you have a board, you have quarterly objectives, probably monthly objectives, right? And it's like you have to move the needle in the business. So, like, how do you keep that level of patience when the market, the external factors of the market is tough in Canada and the U.S. right now, and probably around the world for the most part? How do you keep that balance? I'm curious, as someone that sits in a very very high seat in an organization with, I'm sure, a lot of organizational pressure. How do you handle that day to day, week to week, month to month, and still continue to treat people the way you do?
I think that making sure that I take care of myself also. So, you and I talk a lot about being physically healthy. For me, a lot of it is making sure I exercise regularly. I try and do something every single day. That is a huge outlet for me. It allows me to physically get rid of certain anxieties or stresses, or like there's something that physically I can do. And depending on, what external factors are happening in my professional life will determine whether I do cardio or strength, because there's some days I just want to punch things.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
That's
And I
great.
would also, right. So that, and I also recognize that work is just one part of my life. And so being able to separate that is a huge way that I think that I can be good at in multiple aspects of my role. I am blessed with amazing children, and those children keep me grounded. They don't care about transformation, right?
No.
Right? They
No.
don't care about that. My parents don't really care about that. I've got so I have a life that keeps me grounded and keeps me focused on what's really important, and then the physical outlet with exercising, and then recognizing that I like to be on a team and this is my team. Right.
Yeah.
When I was
Yeah.
younger, I was in teams, and you had your school work and then you had your team. And this, to me, it kind of is the same. Like, this is my teamwork. I want my team to win. I like to win. I would say that's probably part of it, Chris. I like to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that keeps me going too. Like,
Yeah.
I look
Yeah.
for the small wins, and then I know that we've got the big wins. And you know what? You're never going to win every game. And I think that helps me too, right? So when there is something that doesn't work, because there's plenty that doesn't work, um, you're not going to win every game, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, spot on. You can't take care of other people if you don't take care of yourself first, right? So we talk about physical fitness. I think there's a coach, Dan Martell, wrote a book, Buy Back Your Time. He used to say that I didn't see somebody get more physically fit and do worse at work. you know, so which I think is accurate. You take care of yourself, you can, like you said, you just have a clearer mind through the day, and you're attacking the day. So let's kind of just expand on that a little bit. Core values, like you've articulated a few times, like results orientation, like to win, but also the fact that everyone wins, right? We think about our time together back at Sapphire and Ronstadt. I think that was a common core value, was everybody wanted everybody to win, right? When you got promoted, I was happy for you. I got promoted, you're happy for, like, we were happy for each other. So I think that's a really important thing, like results orientation, being a good teammate. What are just some other core values or principles that are important to you that you espouse to the people you've worked with previously and today?
Much more there is to expand on that, Chris. I mean, if we're going to talk words, core values, one of the best core values of any company, really, that I stick with me is Ronstad's, the simultaneous promotion of all interests.
Right.
That was a core value of
I remember
theirs
that one.
that although I don't work for Ronstadt anymore, I carry that with me, because when I think about whether it is an individual contributor or whether you're a CEO of the company, you can dissect that to make sense.
Yeah.
So as a CEO, I think about all of my stakeholders, and that is certainly shareholders, right? But they're just one. But then I've got internal employees. I have customers. In our business, we've got our consultants that are out on billing. We have our communities, right? So there's all of these stakeholders. And if you can really try to put yourself in their shoes and what's important to them, and make the decision that best impacts all of them,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard, because you're always going to have someone who's not happy.
Right.
But then, like, and I can now do that in a heartbeat, right? Like, I know I'm like, oh, but here's what the impact is over here. How do we mitigate this downside? Because this is the upside. Balancing all of that. It's a skill. It's an art, but it's not something that you cannot be learned, right? It can be learned.
Right. Right. Well, let's, maybe one or two more questions, and I'll let you go because I want to be sensitive to time. But I did talk to you before the call about, we grew up in a world believe it or not, we look pretty young for our age. We're not going to say how old we are, but we've
You
both been
keep
doing
talking
this.
about how old we are.
We both been doing this 30 years. So we'll just leave it at that. But the blending of old school techniques with, new technology like AI, et cetera. I'm curious. It's a two-part question. Part one is, back in the 90s, like I sold in a world without computers. I mean, I don't know if you might be slightly younger than me, but like, I didn't have a computer on my desk until a couple of years into the job. So like, the ability, we talk about the importance of relationships in professional staffing. I mean, any staffing industry leader that's on the SIA top 150 list would 100% agree relationships are important, both with your customers and your colleagues in the workplace, right? So talk to me about the old school tenets, the things that you continue today, the two or three things, maybe one or two or three things, and then how you're thinking about new technology trends like AI, et cetera. I'm curious how you blend old school with new school, leading a $500 million.
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll say is that I will often look at my own buying behaviors as a consumer, or my children's buying behaviors as a consumer, and I realize what is normal in everybody's life. But somehow in the staffing industry, we think it's innovative. And believe, I think about that a lot, right? The fact that, whether you mentioned Netflix earlier, Netflix recommending something to me based on my previous viewing history, I don't think that's weird or creepy. That's the kind of place where I see AI making sense in our
Yeah.
business, whether
Yeah.
it's on the candidate side or the client side. Certainly, AI should make every low value, redundant, tedious task, take those, move those into AI. But at the end of the day, Likability matters in this business.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what, people do business with people they like, people they trust, and you might not like or trust an AI until it becomes something that makes your life efficient, right? If I'm a client, when I want to talk to Chris, I want to talk to Chris. Something's going on. I want to explain something that's happening at my business. I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
If I end up having some sort of a billing situation where, Saturday afternoon I'm catching up on stuff and I just want to log in and do something, that's going to be the fulsome experience I'm going to expect from my partners. So when I think about relationships and where technology, whether it's automation or AI, because I think that those are different things, that's where it matters to me, is that your whole journey as a customer, and that goes for our candidates or consultants as well, that journey has to have the perfect balance of, I'll call it omni-channel, right? That there is a person when you want a person. We've all had experiences. Like for me, it's Spotify. Like I never want to be Spotify. Just try and get a human being at Spotify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost
Possible.
impossible.
Yeah.
I never want to be that. But
Right.
I also don't want to think that I'm providing high touch service simply because, and then have no automation for our candidates and clients to have a piece of.
Right.
So that's the balance I try and strike.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. I mean, in my world right now, in the coaching industry, the hot thing is, and again, you're driving a sales organization, but is these like coaching tools that are AI based. So they're listening to calls and giving real time
Mm,
feedback to reps, recruiters, et cetera. And to your point, what I love what I'm trying to do in my industry too, and I think you'd agree with this. There's all these benefits to that AI technology. However, you have a certain vision as a company CEO you're trying to execute against, and certain principles that you agree with. And maybe it's Sandler selling or Challenger selling or whatever approach we have. It's taking a coach, someone like myself or a leader like yourself, saying to the AI technology, hey, look, these are the things I want my reps saying and doing, making sure that we're doing these things. As long as we say and do these things, I'm feeling really good about that call. And so I think that feedback's really interesting because back in the day, Traci, I'm wearing a headset for the podcast, but like I remember the whisper mode. You probably remember this, the headsets back in the day where you'd have the client in one ear, you'd have your manager in the other. They're talking to you. You're trying to your head's going to explode. So to have like an AI or just a coach after the call to do a debrief of like, hey, here's what you missed, here's what you can do better, and have that instantly, accessible to you makes you better on the next call. So I think that that's one use case for AI right now that's really positive. I'm seeing in sales, staffing, recruiting, et cetera.
that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, something you should think. Something you should think about. I'm going to you 9-time nominee of top 150 women of staffing industry analysts, which I've been involved with and been a guest speaker before. I'm going to TechServe in a couple of weeks, and that's what we're talking about. Is just how do we continue to blend the old school relationship based techniques that are super important in our industry with new technology stacks and innovation to the best of our ability. It's great
I'll
stuff.
look forward to it because I'll be there as well.
Awesome. Well, I'll see you in Marco Island. Well, Traci, anything else? So any last bits of wisdom, anything that we missed, anything you wish I had asked, before we closed today's show? Because I mean, the insights are just incredible. If, I'm going to go back and listen to this and just listen to a few times. And I like to go back and remember like, oh, this is why we did this and this is why it worked, and just keep doing those things. But anything that we missed today that you wish we had brought up?
I guess I'll close with this, Chris. Something that I believe at my core, and I tell people all the time, whether it's my children who don't really want to hear it, or anyone that I work with, is that being successful is easy. Staying successful is hard. And that's what I'm always thinking about, is what's the next thing, right? Anyone can have a one hit wonder. Anyone can win one championship, but to do it over and over and over and over is really hard, and takes discipline, and it takes a goal, and then how to get there. So what I love about what you're doing and the fact that you're doing this podcast and wrote your book, and helping people, is that helping people be successful for the long term.
Yeah. No, again, and again, you just continue to speak to abundance mindset, just continuing to get better, continuous improvement, always trying to get better. If you get better, 1% better every day, you can look up 30 years and you can be running a $500 million company, people. So, just listen to Traci, just follow her lead. Traci, where can people find you if they want to look you up on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram? Where's a good place for people to find you if they wanted to look you up?
The best place is LinkedIn with my name. Just look up Traci Fiatte Thomas, and you can't miss me. From there, you can get to our company website, my contact. You can email me. So I would say LinkedIn, Chris.
Awesome. The last thing I have to ask, there's one tradition, Traci, you had. You'll send me text messages, random text messages. How many business cards do you have between all the companies you've either worked at, that got acquired, that got bought, that you helped buy? Like, how many business cards do we have? You'll send me all these pictures of the old business cards. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I've got them all, right? Every job I've ever had, I have at least one business card from there.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fun. Probably 20.
Oh my God, it's so great. Yeah. But again, a lot of that was just acquisition growth, and that was a lot of fun. But Traci, I admire you so much. It's fun I'm so happy for your success. You deserve everything, all the accolades and opportunities you've had. You're incredibly hardworking. And again, I remember watching you sold in New York City. You talk about Toronto, which is a lot like New York, but man, if you can be a sales representative, anybody listening, if you're there, I grew up in Boston. Boston can be a tough market. I don't know if there's a tougher market than New York, and you were number one in New York. That was 20 something years ago, but kudos to you and all your success. And I don't know how you did it, because New York, the Big Apple, is a tough market to sell in. I don't know how you did it.
Well, I appreciate all your accolades, Chris. You're making me feel very special today. So thank you.
You are. Right. Again, Traci Fiatte Thomas, folks, thanks for joining the MTA podcast. And if you want to look up Traci, follow her on LinkedIn, and we will see you again in an upcoming show. Traci, thanks for your time today. It was great to see you.
Thank you.